Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hafs Salmawi. I would like to welcome all of you to our 9th webinar on Towards Mediterranean Sustainable Energy Future. This webinar is a part of the program of webinars which are organized by the project Support to the Technical and Financial Sustainability of Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Sector. This project is a technical assistance project targeting the energy sector in Egypt. It is an EU-supported project. It's being implemented in cooperation with both Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy and Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources in Egypt. This project is executed by a consortium of consultants led by DAI, Human Dynamics in cooperation or in partnership with Tractor Bell. Ladies and gentlemen, our project consists of 5 components. Component C of the project is about providing technical support for the establishment of energy modeling unit, an upgrade of the energy strategy of Egypt up to 2040. The energy modeling unit will be the core body of regularly update and extend the integrated and sustainable energy strategy of Egypt. The unit will be responsible to review the strategy whenever a new event happens and may have an impact on the strategy outcomes or the security of supply to Egypt. It will keep developing different energy scenarios and keep a secure energy data register. Also, it will be responsible to develop the annual report of Egypt Energy Outlook and provide decision support to the government and the Supreme Council of Energy on different energy issues based on energy simulations. On the other hand, the project has introduced an enhancement to the methodology of developing the energy strategy. It includes both long-term and short-term planning to avoid restrictions, which may be well identified due to low resolution nature of long-term planning. Also, consideration of the dynamic relation between the energy sector and the macroeconomy. This takes into consideration impact of the changes in the energy sector to the rest of the economy, and on the other hand, the macroeconomic and microeconomic projections to drive the energy demand. On the other hand, Egypt's regional energy objective, which targets playing a leading role in the regional level, such that Egypt becomes a regional energy hub, this should take into consideration the interactive relation between both local and regional development. This relations has a dialectic nature, where both have impact on each other. Developments on the local level represents a part of all on the regional level. On the other hand, regional developments usually have an impact on the local level, especially if these regional developments have their cooperation tools and instruments. Considering this, cooperation with the regional energy associations become very much needed. Knowing their scope, projections, and plans are very much important to be interactively integrated in the process for the development of the energy strategy of Egypt. Considering this and considering the important role of the Mediterranean domain to the energy scene of Egypt, it has been seen the importance to introduce the ongoing development, projected energy scenarios, and plan to our stakeholders. I appreciate very much the cooperative attitude we got when we forward our requests to the key energy associations in the Mediterranean to have this webinar. These associations are Observatoire Méditerranéen de l'Énergie, OME, which is the platform for energy dialogue, cooperation, and best practice exchange, and a think tank of reference in the Euro-Mediterranean region. MEDREG, which is the network of Mediterranean energy regulators that aim to set the conditions for establishment of a future Mediterranean energy community. MEDTSO, which is the Association of the Mediterranean Transmission System Operators for electricity, operating the high voltage transmission network of 19 Mediterranean countries, which was established to facilitate the integration of the Mediterranean power systems and foster security and socio-economic development in the region. We are honored that these associations are represented by their general directors, general secretariats, as well as key divisions directors, which shows the commitments of this association to have this energy dialogue. It's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Guerrero, the Director, Monitoring Modeling Division at OME. Unfortunately, we was planned to have Dr. Hoda Allal, the General Director, and we hope for her getting well soon. Also, I apologize for Dr. Ahmed Beltagi, the Energy and Transport Sector Manager at the EU delegation in Egypt, where he has an eminent meeting at Minister of Petroleum, joining the ambassador, EU ambassador to Cairo for a meeting with the Minister of Petroleum. At the beginning, let me introduce Ms. Lisa Guerrero. Ms. Lisa Guerrero joined the OME in 2005 and is currently the Director of Monitoring and Modeling Division. As such, Ms. Guerrero oversees OME work on historical data, outlooks, and forecasts, and is in charge of overall consistency of modeling work and resulting messages. Ms. Guerrero is also in charge of producing the Mediterranean Energy Perspectives, OME flagship publications. The division produces medium to long-term energy demand, efficiency, power generation, renewables, and environment analysis for the Mediterranean Energy Perspective and other publications. She also conducts analysis on various energy topics such as energy efficiency, energy security, carbon emission, energy transition, electrification, and hydrogen. Prior to joining the OME in 2005, she worked at the International Energy Agency as an energy analyst for the Economic Analysis Division, contributing to the 5 editions of the World Energy Outlook. Lisa Guerrero holds a postgraduate degree in international economics, major macroeconomics and economic development, and a master's in management studies, major finance and tax law from the University 4 of Paris, Dauphine. Ms. Guerrero, the floor is yours, where Mrs. Guerrero will present to us energy scenarios for the Mediterranean. Ms. Guerrero, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I'm again very sorry that Huda could not join us today, so I will be presenting her slides. We want to thank you, the organizers, for inviting us, and I will try to be brief. It's not my strong suit, so I will try. Now, let me share our presentation. Interesting. I'm having a bit of a problem. So there we go. It's working. Sorry about this. Are you seeing this? Are you seeing my presentation? Okay. So just a few words about OME. Just to situate for those who don't know us, OME is a private and non-profit association that was created over 30 years ago. We actually bring together all the major energy companies that operate around the Mediterranean region. The membership is open to all energy companies and that have either operate or have an interest in Mediterranean countries. We have 4 working committees and experts that are either members, or we also have a partner status. So there's different ways of being involved with OME. So we encourage anyone who wants to join to please join. We've had a long-standing relationship with EHC and EGAS, who have been amazing members contributing to OME work, and I would like to thank them as well. And we also, among other things, serve as the secretariat for the UFM gas platform. What we do, we have several major venues that we work in. One of the main one, and I think this has been a prominent one, is for over 30 years we've been promoting energy dialogue to strengthen regional cooperation in the region. We actually are the voice of the industry with our members, so carrying out the messages from our members. We do a lot of training as well, but also one of the core of our missions is definitely the energy analysis and studies. We've had, since the inception of OME, databases that we've collected, and we've been doing scenarios for over 30 years of the Mediterranean region. One of our flagship publication, as you mentioned, is the Mediterranean Energy Perspectives, that brings together all the expertise that we do in OME, where we propose in-depth study of the region, so transversal for all energy in the region. We also have country-specific analysis, and here let me remind of the Mediterranean Energy Perspective we did on Egypt, thanks to the collaboration to, of course, our members, EHC and EGAS, and also other institutions in Egypt that were very forthcoming. We had a very strong exchange, and I think MEP Egypt is still one of the major milestones to have a view, transversal view of the energy situation, past and future in Egypt. We offer, of course, mid and long-term perspective and prospective. And we like to look at all the uncertainties that have affected and that will affect the energy future. Today I will be presenting specifically our latest issue of Mediterranean Energy Perspective MEP, which is we've now called it MEP to 2050, although it's a 2021 edition. It's just came out, so it's right fresh out of the press. It offers energy perspectives for supply and demand up to 2050. So that's a step up from what used to be 2040 horizon. We actually factored in the COVID impact. We base all our scenarios on an in-house econometric demand-based model. I think it's important to say that our three exogenous variables are population, GDP, and international fuel prices. That play a role in this. This is a demand-based model, and this is an important thing to underline because it's what drives the scenarios. This means we do not take into account extra additional production that would need to be made, for instance, extra generation of electricity to care for exports, or extra production of hydrogen for export to the rest of the world. And I think this is also for electricity an important point, because we will see MedReg and MedTESO. We don't foresee the exchanges, like additional exchanges in electricity, for instance, across. We of course take into account the networks that are being built, but we do not model specifically extra generation for exports. It's important because, or imports, by the way, because that's the demand that would be needed by each country. And of course, this could change if some of it can be imported or exported. We have three scenarios now. Our two base OME scenarios are actually based on NDCs. So this means that in the reference scenario, which is basically a business as usual scenario, it actually incorporates some of the NDCs. As you may know, there's the NDCs have two sets of targets, and one is the unconditional sets that are quite tame, which just are what the countries commit to regardless of whether they can get international financing. And then there's a second set of NDCs that we've put into the proactive scenario, which actually foresee that the NDCs would be realized in full, which means much more energy efficiency and much more renewables. What's new in this installment is that we've actually factored in a new scenario that we've worked out with the help of the experts from the EUFM energy platforms, and that was co-funded by the European Commission. That's a near zero carbon 2050. It's actually based on the new Green Deal that was issued by the European Union. The difference is that while European countries would be achieving a net zero carbon future by 2050, for most of the non-EU countries in the Mediterranean region, this would be to 2060, as this was deemed more reasonable for the countries around the Mediterranean basin. Now, looking at the countries we look at, we actually look at 26 countries of the Mediterranean basin. In the north, this is basically EU countries and some smaller that we call other North Mediterranean that are not modeled separately. And these are the only countries that aren't modeled separately. All the other countries have their separate country model that we've looked at. Now, just to give a quick view of the Mediterranean, it's a 550 million population at present, around 1,000 MTOE of energy demand for the region, and that's about 7% of the world total. In CO2 emission, that's around 2,000 million tons of CO2. But that's only 6% of world, whereas the GDP is also 7% of the world with a 10 trillion euro amount. Now, I mentioned we factored in the COVID impact. I think it's been, obviously, for the region, it's impacted the region greatly. It's impacted the North Mediterranean way more than it has the South Mediterranean. Overall, the Mediterranean energy demand dropped 9% compared to 2019 and 2020. It's already started recovering, and in the estimations for 2021 and 2022 are a bit more optimistic. In our scenarios, we see it going back to previous level by 2023 at latest. These kind of impacts, whether it's wars or financial crisis, and this one is certainly being one of the strongest because it's exceeded by far the oil shocks and the 2008 financial crisis. But what we've seen is once the factors off, and we do hope that COVID will be soon behind us thanks to vaccination, then things could get back to normal. Now, the normal is what we're looking at in our scenarios. What's going to be the normal? We're hoping that COVID will help move things along towards energy transition rather than going back to the business as usual. But it was important to keep those three scenarios open because which path we're going to get on is going to depend on the measures that are going to be taken now and in the coming years. Now, as I mentioned, the exogenous variables in the model are strongly are the population and GDP, and they're very strong variables. The correlation in the past, much more than international prices, population and GDP really make the demand situation. So what we see, and I think it's important, is that there's really two sets of trends. In the north, the population is actually going to be declining by 2050, and it's already started, whereas it's going to increase by 140 million into 2050. And when you see Egypt and Turkey, which are the largest populated countries in the South Med, are going to be adding more than half of that increase. Whereas France and Italy, which are the two largest populated countries in the North Mediterranean, are actually going to decrease by 4 million. The same actually for GDP, maybe not as strongly, but what we're expecting is most of the increase in the GDP to 2050 will come from South Mediterranean, which means that more people, more GDP, so that means potentially more energy demand. And now the question is, what type of energy demand? So when we look at the three scenarios, the reference scenario, as I said, more like a business as usual, incorporating some tame targets, the proactive scenario, NDCs in full, and the pro-med scenario, which is the near zero carbon scenario. What we see is that if we continue on the trends that we've been going through, even incorporating NDCs, but the lower targets, we would basically be seeing a growth in demand in the next 30 years that's similar to what we've seen since the 90s, which means that we'd have an increase in energy demand by 37%. Whereas if we look at the proactive scenario, that means if we realize the NDCs in full, and then we know that's already a challenge, this could actually help drop the energy demand 26% from what the business as usual would be. And that would actually stabilize the energy demand from current levels and only to be like a 2% demand by 2050 compared to today's levels. However, where there's a big difference, and if we really want to lower energy demand compared to today's levels, that would be a 17% decrease, and that's only through a ProMed scenario. So what does that mean? It's actually two different stories from the north versus the South Mediterranean. The north has already embarked, and we've seen, because the population is also decreasing. So we're expecting it to continue regardless of the scenario. But of course, in a business as usual, we'd only cap demand by 12%, whereas in a ProMed, we would actually decrease by 42% the energy demand levels from today's levels. In the South Mediterranean, what's happening is we would more than double energy demand if we just go for the lowest NDC targets. If we go for the proactive scenario, so if all the NDCs are realized in full, it would still mean a 50% increase in energy demand in the South. And if we go for a ProMed scenario, so for a net carbon to 2060, so by 2050, we'd have an increase, but limited increase of 18% compared to today's levels. Now, if we look by fuel, so I've plotted on the left is the 2018, so the current situation pre-COVID. That was quite, how would you say, fossil-based, and with some incremental nuclear and renewables. But if you look at what incrementally would need to be added by 2050, depending on the scenarios, then you say that the actual mix would be very different. In a reference scenario, so in the business as usual, of course, yes, there would be increase in renewables, and that's for sure. But we would still have a strong increase in gas and oil mainly, a very slight decrease in coal. Now, if we're going for a proactive scenario, there's a much bigger increase in renewables, but what's important is to note that the fossil fuels would actually decrease. And of course, in the ProMed scenario, not only do renewables increase, not so much more than in a proactive scenario, but what's important is to see, first of all, the coal would decrease, and that's basically in power generation and some in industry, but also very strongly oil, and this is transport. And this is probably one of the sectors that's going to be the hardest to transform, and that's where the ProMed scenario is the most ambitious, is to actually manage to steer away from oil in the transport sector. Now, what it means also is that the end use has to change. I think the electricity sector is a good example. When you look at electricity demand, so here there's several information, maybe it's a bit confusing, but the stacked bars are actually the demand, so the electricity that is used in the end use sectors, separated between north and south demand. The blue dots is the actual share of electricity in end use. Some call it electrification. It might be confusing. It's not electrification as in people that don't have access to electricity. It's electrification as in the amount of electricity you use in the end sector. And as I was saying, in the transport sector, going away from oil and towards electricity, as well as biofuels and hydrogen, but also in other usages. Even in industry, we're expecting to see much more use of electricity replacing coal and oil and gas as well. So what that means, and when you see this graph, if you look at 2050, you see that in the reference scenario and in the ProMed scenario, the actual demand is not that much different. That means that electricity demand is going to increase regardless of the scenarios. So in the reference scenario, it's increased by 78%. In the ProMed scenario, it increases by 65%. Now, if you look at the top line in the green share, that's the share of renewables and power generation. Now, what makes a huge difference is that, yes, we're moving towards more electricity in the end use sectors. And yes, the levels of electricity demand would be fairly similar. But the difference is that instead of having renewables, that is only 48%, so half of it from renewables, the power generation would be based on renewables up to 72%, and in some countries up to 90%. So that means that you're replacing end usage, so you're replacing fossil fuel use by electricity. So instead of having 26% of end use that's met by electricity, you have 40% that is met by electricity. And on top of this, that electricity is greener. So altogether, you have, of course, a much lower carbon footprint. Now, if we look at what that means per region in terms of fuel, as I said, you will in the ProMed scenario, in the north, 85% of the power generation would be produced from renewables. In the South Mediterranean, this would go up to 70%, which is much higher than the reference scenario in both cases. And what you see is also the increase is much lower, which is due to the incremental renewables, which are much more efficient than gas, oil, and coal technologies. The also other factor that will be playing a role is the electricity storage. We're expecting these new technologies to come in and help alleviate the variability of renewables as well, and these will play a key role. We also have, we are also expecting biofuels, green gases to play a role in the electricity and the energy mix. We've mentioned hydrogen before to displace some of the oil used in transport, and also to replace some of the gas. So we're expecting green gas to also play a role. As I mentioned before, we're not expecting, we have not modeled the production of biomethane or hydrogen for export. And that's important because Morocco and even Egypt have plans for exports, which have not been included. So what you see in these generation numbers, because a lot of the hydrogen will be from electrolysis, is not included there. So that's the basic to meet the demand and to produce hydrogen as side effects, if I may say, of variability of renewables or of excess of nuclear using full on the load factors, utilization rates of nuclear capacities in countries that do have nuclear. What it means for the regions in terms of energy dependence, I think that's what's the most important for the region, and especially South Med countries, may they be producers or importers. What's very important to see is today in 2018, the region is a net importer for 39% of its needs. And if we look by sub-region, we see that the north is at 59% and the south is only at 9% imports. But what happens in 2050, if we stay in the reference scenario, so in the current trends that have been going on for the past 30 years, and we further this, yes, the overall dependence rate would be 40%, so that not very different from 39% today, but in volume, this is a huge increase of imported energy demand, and that's of course fossil fuel demand. Looking at the energy dependence in the other scenarios, this would actually drop to 14%, and the actual volume would drop in the proactive scenario. But interestingly enough, the region would become an actual net exporter up to 15% in the ProMed scenario. Of course, this is when you look at north and south, it's a bit different, but even in the north, introducing decarbonized energies, so renewables mainly, this means that the North Mediterranean would actually fall to only a 10% import of its need in 2050. And the South would become an exporter in the ProMed scenario of 33% versus increasing its import needs to 30% in the reference scenario. So clearly, in terms of sustainability of the region, the ProMed scenario is possibly the only one that offers a brighter future than in the current situation. Now, what it means in terms of CO2 emission, which is the second main item that's desired in the going for a net carbon neutrality. As you see, obviously, this is leading, as we saw for energy demand. If we continue as we are, basically the CO2 emissions would increase more or less as they did the past 30 years to 28%. They could actually drop by 39% in a proactive scenario, but they would actually drop by 74% in the ProMed scenario, reaching carbon neutrality for the EU countries and near carbon neutrality for the South countries. Just summing up, that means that if you've got the reference scenario CO2 emissions, the need for the different items, it's basically one of the main things is if you want to go for a ProMed and a neutral carbon scenario, it's energy efficiency, even before renewables. with, of course, pivotal technologies such as green gas and CCUS helping to achieve the lower CO2 emissions. And this is reflected, we've also assessed the investment needed to reach this level, and it's between 4 to 6 trillion. Of course, 6 trillion in the PROMED scenario, so much more important than the 4 trillion in the reference scenario, but this is money that we need. I mean, the 4 trillion is money that you have to come up with regardless of the scenario, so it's an extra 2 trillion, but the main thing is that it has to go to different items. It's easier when you only had to look at supply of energy and producing, because it's easier to impact that and to finance that and to put money into it. It's much harder when it's diluted in the whole economy, because energy efficiency is not just about the technologies and the energy sector. It's about building cities differently. It's about seeing transport differently. It's about changing the habits and so on. And so this demands a lot of money. But what we've seen in studies that have been conducted in Morocco, Tunisia, and other countries is that actually the cost benefit that we were not able to incorporate in our investment numbers, which is the cost benefit, the job creation, the avoided effects of CO2 impact, and so on, actually brings more to the economy than if you go for a reference scenario that might seem a bit less costly. So basically, just to conclude very quickly, the current trends aren't enough. Even the NDCs are not enough. We hope that COVID is the trigger, and we've seen it, because as we were doing MEP, things have gone towards that. People have moved on to the New Deal, the New Green Deal. It's becoming something that people are talking about, that are factor into their projections, which was actually nearly in utopia when we started working on this MEP issue at the beginning. So we're hoping that one of the positive effects of COVID, amongst all the disasters it's created, will be that it might help move towards more to the energy transition and green energy transition. What's for sure is that not only all technologies and policies will be needed, but for the region, and the Mediterranean really needs a cooperation. I think what COVID has shown is that you need your neighbors, and that this is a win-win situation when we work together. And I think the next speakers will be able to tell you more about bridging the continent and the different countries together. So I'd like to thank all of you, and please don't hesitate to ask questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Actually, I encourage all of our participants, we have a Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any question, please post it at the Q&A, and we have by the end of the presentation and Q&A session. But if I could comment on what very interesting work Lisa presented to us, I think the keyword is energy efficiency. As we have seen, there is no much difference between renewable energy generated in the near zero scenarios and on the PROMED scenario. But the difference primarily comes from energy efficiency. So keywords, yes, renewable will play a role, but it's as renewable already has been launched from the base, and it's moving forward, driven by prices, where currently renewable prices are almost 50% of the grid parity. So it's moving forward. But I think the keyword is energy efficiency, which could make the difference between the PROMED and the near zero scenario. Also, if the nice remark Lisa mentioned about electrification, I think we could introduce a new definition. We could use what being used in telecom, like 4G, 5G. So we could say 2G electrification, which is a new generation of electrification, where previously we was talking about electrification to have an access to electricity. Now we talk an electrification as to have higher share of electricity in the energy mix. And as Lisa showed us, that we are heading to 40%. Actually, our status in Egypt now is 21%. We are relying very much on switching to electric mobility, which could represent one of the main drivers for higher electrification, but also I believe cooking fuels could also be a part of the electrification process, as well as industrial heating and many other applications, as prices for electricity due to the higher share of renewable drops. Final remark, I would say that high share of renewable might need to think about offshore wind production in the Mediterranean. I think we need to think about this. This is what we already realized in our scenarios developed for the energy strategies, that yes, solar could play a very important role, but solar regardless, depends very much on the introduction of a storage system, where if you don't have much capacity for storage, solar will be restricted to the daily load. But wind could be generated anytime during day or night. So basically, we need to exploit more wind resources and maybe need to start to think about offshore wind generation in the Mediterranean. I just pose some points which might trigger questions to Lisa. I think, thank you, Lisa, very much. We will move to our second speaker, which is Medrag. Sure, Medrag has a special to me. I'm honored to be one of the founders of Medrag. This was around 14 years ago. Medrag is being presented by Hassan Özkök, Deputy General Secretary of Medrag, and he will go on to speak to us about establishing Mediterranean energy market and roles of regulator. But let me, as a beginning, to introduce Mr. Hassan. Mr. Hassan Özkök has been working for the Mediterranean Energy Regulators, Medrag, as the Association Deputy Secretary General since March 2018. He is in charge of developing activities, tool, regulatory standards, and good practices to promote an efficient and compatible regulatory framework in Mediterranean region. He also coordinates and contributes to the national and regional energy progress reports, supports Medrag institutional relations, and guides training program on legislative and regulatory development. Prior to Medrag, he occupied the position of sector manager for energy at the delegation of the European Union to Turkey, managing reform process implementation and follow-up of the pre-accession developments, monitoring and coordinating the programs, projects under the EU financial assistance to Turkey between 2021 and 2018. In 2006, he worked as a senior gas expert. So his background is a gas field, head of hydrocarbons for the Energy Community Secretariat in Vienna, where he contributed to the development of strategies for gas market structures in the southeastern European countries, and monitored the compliance of members with EU internal energy activities. Mr. Hassan has received a BSc in Metallurgical and Material Science Engineering, and later mastered from University in Turkey. Mr. Hassan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Hafez. Do you see my slides on the screen?
Yes, we are seeing.
First of all, I would like to thank you very much for having us on board, and I wish you all success with your projects. Recently, there has been a kind of slight changes in Medrag, let's say the secretariat structures. I was appointed as the director of the secretariat from June onwards. And
congratulations.
Thank you very much, Hafez. And now I would like to just share with you our experiences. Of course, coming from the regulators and coming from the system operators, I know both sides. So before entering into the Mediterranean region, I just would like to very briefly inform you about the developments in the European Union. When I started at the regulators, it was 2001, almost 20 years ago. And then the endeavors in the European Union have also started exactly in the same periods, I would say that, because following the first energy package in electricity in 1996 and in gas in 1998, and majority of EU countries have started liberalizing their energy market based on these two community-based directives. So basically, since then, I have been following all the developments, not only in the European Union, but also in the Balkan countries, including Turkey. And then since last 3 years, of course, I have been following very closely the developments in the Southern Mediterranean countries. So basically, they are following almost the same paths. In order to liberalize the energy market, they exchange information, experience, and knowledge, which is crucial, I would say that. So who are we, first of all, and what are our objectives as MEDREC? MEDREC is the Association of Mediterranean Energy Regulators, composed of 27 members from 22 countries, out of which 9 from European countries, 4 from Balkans, including Turkey, and 9 from Middle East and Northern African countries. So what are our objectives? Our objective is to promote a harmonized, non-discriminatory, compatible energy regulation in the Mediterranean region with a view to establishing a secure, stable, and competitive Mediterranean energy market. This is our main objective. In order to reach to this objective, we are promoting and fostering the cooperation and information exchange among our members and beyond. Also, in order to reach these targets, we are also organizing the capacity building activities such as workshops, trainings, study visits for our members. And in order to do this work, we have 5 working groups, namely electricity, renewable energy, gas, institutional, and consumers working groups. So if you look into the strategy of MEDREC, the long perspective strategy until 2030, we have 5 main pillars. So those are the first one, to create a sound institutional regulatory framework in the Mediterranean region. What we really means with this one? So we means that each member of MEDREC has an independent regulators. And in addition, the regulatory framework in liberalizing and monitoring and functioning the energy markets, a framework of regulation. And then, of course, in order to interoperate the grids and lines, you need a common network codes. So this is the first objective. Second one, to create optimal conditions for the investments. So what we mean with this, so our expectation is to see that all countries are interconnected. Gas and electricity infrastructure are operated in a kind of harmony and effectively. And under this second, let's say, the pillar, also we would like to see the incentive mechanism from the members promoting renewable energy sources in the total energy consumptions and into the generation of electricity, of course. And in addition, to promote also, as Professor Haf has already mentioned, that energy efficiency, which is mostly neglected in many areas, but it's extremely crucial, like renewable energy to me. And the third pillar is the functioning, competitive, transparent electricity and gas markets. In the end, we would like to see that the electricity and gas pipelines are interconnected and interoperated with each other in the Mediterranean region. And we also would like to see that the transparency and information of exchange, the information of exchange are really improving and have been improved. And in the end, regulators would have the ability to closely monitor and supervise the developments in the energy markets. So the fourth pillar is to intensify the regional cooperation, which is crucial. As I said, I have been following the developments in the European Union, and then European Union have also created a kind of fully functioning single energy market through this regional cooperation. In the beginning, they have also divided the European Union into different regions. And first and foremost, they have created a functioning energy market in those regions, and then they combine together. So the regional coordination and cooperation, we would like to see that it's intensified and it's moving, and common principles and market integrations are defined. And in addition, in order to reach to these targets, we would like to also develop some pilot projects in the regions among different countries, of course, and then to see that whether it is working, then we can just widen towards the other members. And the last one is to protect the vulnerable consumers, not only to protect and to also effectively see that they are able to choose their supplier freely, like the European Union. As you know, that since 2007, all the consumers are eligible and they have right to freely choose their supplier at a kind of transparent tariffs. So of course, vulnerable consumers are also important in the region, and they should be also protected through different incentive mechanisms and different transparent regulations. If you look at the challenges in the Mediterranean regions, somehow Lisa have already mentioned some of them, but I will just skip the physical and the structural challenges. I will just move on the regulatory challenges. So if you look at the regulatory challenges, we see that lack of harmonized legislation and market rules, which is the first one. So of course, our endeavors are to create a kind of harmonized legislation. It doesn't mean that it should be identical, but harmonized legislation. So this is crucial, because if you would like to interconnect and interoperate the infrastructures, so you have to have at least similar legislation or similar, let's say, the rules and procedures. Otherwise, you cannot work in harmony with each other. This is crucial. Lack of independent regulators. I'm very glad to inform you that except 2 members, which are Lebanon and Tunisia, all the rest, our members have already established their independent regulators, and then they have already opened the market to competition, and they have started liberalizing their energy market, which is a very good news. And just to inform you that we are in close contact with Tunisia and Lebanon colleagues as well. They have already confirmed that they are also working towards this direction, and then by the end of this year, as soon as possible, they are also planning to establish their independent regulators, which is very good news too. Of course, the subsidization among the different market activities, it's still an issue, I would say that, and then which is somehow harming the competition in the market. But of course, with the establishment of the independent regulators and also the regulation, transparent regulation, so I believe that in a very near future, this cross-subsidization on the tariffs will be removed step by step. Of course, information, to reach the information and the necessary data is another issue. And then I also see clearly that the majority of our members, regulators, they are really publishing all the information which will be needed for the market operators. So this has to be, of course, improved as well. If you look at the barriers and challenges, I have somehow partially mentioned that, of course, the government influence on the electricity exchange and generation mix. This is one of the main issues in the Mediterranean region, particularly in the southern members, Balkan countries as well. I would say that absence of a secure and stable regulatory framework among the countries have dramatically improved. And as I said, that except a few countries, the current legislations or the laws which are somehow regulating the energy markets are in place in majority of our members, and they have already started working towards a fully liberalized energy market. Subsidization, I have already mentioned. Of course, I mean, if you look at the region, we can see that the level of developments in the region is significantly different comparing to the European Union with Balkan countries and southern members of Mediterranean. So this is an issue, but it's not a big barrier in the end if all members really agree on a kind of common legislation to interconnect and interoperate the infrastructures. Transparency, as I said, that it should be improved, and it is being improved since sometimes. Of course, stable, secure, and long-term regulation is needed, and it's a necessary. I would also share a few examples from my experience. So Lisa have already mentioned about the general trends, supply-demand projections. It's a kind of repetition, but population, as Lisa have already mentioned, that it will increase, particularly in the southern members. And then this increase would be more or less by 2014. This is a slide that I got from the OME, of course. It's around 45%. So basically, more than 80 million inhabitants will be added into these countries. And as a kind of stagnant energy demand in the northern and European parts, and of course, a kind of energy intensive development in the south and eastern Mediterranean region. And the electricity demand will double by 2040, and which will require an extra capacity of roughly 185 gigawatt. And most of it is expected to come from the renewable energy sources. And in order to reach these investments, more than $400 billion is needed. So just for your information from one of our reports, the developments in the electricity sector comparing 1996-2016, as you can see that clearly that the electricity demand in the last 20 years, basically in 3 countries doubled, and even in Egypt and Algeria is more than double. So this trend will continue, as we have already seen the projections that given by Lisa too. So regulatory reforms, it's a must. We would say that in order to create a fully functioning energy market, the first step, you should start to regulating the energy markets. At least I know from my experiences. When we started regulating the energy markets in the beginning of 2000s, and since then, I have been monitoring, I have been following the developments. Not only in the European Union and also in the Balkan countries and southern members as well. And I have clearly seen that if you create a kind of transparent and good regulatory framework with a kind of, let's say, so-called independent regulators, I can assure you that the investment in your country will boom. For sure. I have seen this one in many regions, in Balkans, in Turkey, in some other European countries. This is obvious because the regulation and the long-term perspectives gives the investor a kind of confidence, transparency. If they see that the markets are regulated transparently, they see the prices, they see the regulation, and they see the future. And one concrete example from my life, while working for the European Commission at the delegation of Turkey, I was receiving almost every week several investors where they wanted to really invest in the Turkish energy market. And when, of course, before entering into the Turkish energy markets, they were coming to me as a sector manager for energy. We were evaluating and then exchanging the views on the energy market. I would tell you that basically they were asking two main questions, nothing else. Whether a regulator is in place and with a kind of transparent regulatory framework. And secondly, how the prices are identified and defined. And based on these two prerequisites, let's say in this way, They were deciding whether to enter into market or not. That's why this is extremely important. And in the end, I have clearly seen that with a kind of clear regulation, with a kind of so-called, let's say, of course, none of the regulators are fully independent, and we are not really expecting this one. But if you create a kind of independency level, that you can also attract investors in your country too. So I have already mentioned about the role of regulators, as I have already said, that they ensure a clear institutional architect at the national levels, transparency, improved investment planning capacity with long-term assessment. As I said, that these are the crucial elements for the investors and for the market players in the end. Again, these are the benefits. If the Mediterranean countries are interconnected with each other, I'm sure that Angelo will mention in details the barriers and the benefits, challenges, opportunities on this one. But of course, it will definitely improve the security of supply in the region if the region is interconnected with each other, for sure. Increased energy efficiency and also reduce the electricity prices for the final consumer. Why? Because they somehow reallocate the investment risk and cost with each other. So the European Union is probably the best example in the world in that respect. Once the whole countries are interconnected with each other, and how they have improved the security of supply and reduced the costs and also increased the quality of the services. So these are the benefits mainly. So just a kind of snapshot from the trends. As I said already, except 2 countries, the rest of our members have their, let's say, the independent regulators, and they have the power to fix and approve the tariffs, which is also crucial and important. Majority of them are responsible for the dispute settlement, which is an important mechanism that in the end, the regulators are involved in the situations in case if they see that there is a conflict. And every NRI sets or approves interconnection capacities, means third-party access. It is clearly identified by our members. They monitor the performances, impose, if need be, the sanctions, and they're also responsible for the consumer protection. Majority of them take the decision on the internal organizations. Majority of them publish the information, and then they also report the government, ministry, or parliament based on their countries. So to just sum up the benefits and the impact of the regulators and the regulation on the market, it is crucial, as I said, that a coordinating policy, which is required to me among the regulators and the policy makers, because if you work in harmony with the policy makers, if you clearly identify the barriers and obstacles. So if you work together, of course, in the end, the regulators are the implementing authorities. They are not the policy makers. They cannot define the things. The policy makers identify or develop mostly the laws and regulation, and the duty of the regulators is to implement these laws and regulations. Of course, they have right also to develop internal market rules and procedures as well. As I said, that regulation can facilitate and promote investments. I have given you some clear examples from my life, and I have also seen some other examples in the Balkan countries. For example, the cooperation started in the beginning of 2000, and then it was extended and then covered all the Balkan countries. So currently, Balkan countries de facto is a member of European Union in energy sectors, confirming that they are going to implement the energy legislation in their respective countries. By doing this one through the Energy Community Treaty, they somehow give the signal to the investors that if you come to our region, if you come to invest in our region. So you will see the clear rules and procedures with an independent regulators regulating the energy market. So with the regulation, of course, you ensure the accelerated permit, so which is extremely important. So there are certain timelines where you can start your investment, where you can really give the necessary information to regulators before you start your investments. And through the incentive mechanism, particularly in the energy efficiency and the renewable energy, they can promote the activities in those two regions. And in the end, I would say that maybe it's one of the most important things. Either regulators are identifying the tariffs or they approve the tariffs, which is crucial for the investors, not only for the investors, for the system operators, and also for the other market players, because they will also see very clearly how they can develop their infrastructure, how they can extend their infrastructure, and with a kind of clear role and regulations. Just finalizing, I would like to appreciate once more Egyptian, let's say the regulators, Egypt era, where Professor Hafez was the chairman, and then chairman of MEDREC as well, and also GAZREC. They are two very active regulators of MEDREC association, and then they are not only benefiting from the other members' experiences, they are also contributing with their, let's say, the experiences as well. Such as, I mean, the GAZREC just recently established three years ago, more or less, and then, but with a kind of very big capacity and skillful experts, they have developed and really significant regulation, which I'm coming from a gas sector. I am extremely astonished with the development they are making. And then Egypt area as well, they are also creating a very important electricity market in the Egyptian energy market too. So having said this one, thank you very much once more, and then I leave the floor to Professor Hafez. If you have, of course, questions, I will be more than happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Hassan. Really appreciate your valuable presentation. Actually, as Mr. Hassan mentioned, that there is $400 billion investment will be needed for the future. Maybe, as Lisa also presented, that either we have this $400 billion go for an expansion in capacity or reduction in capacity. Anyway, the $4 billion is needed. You might need to invest in expansion of capacity, or you might need to invest in energy efficiency or in changes in some demand sector like transportation sector. So anyway, investment is needed. And this shows, as Hassan pointed very clearly, that how investment is very much tuned to the status and capacity of regulators in the market. So regulators are keywords for ensuring flow for investment, because no investment will flow unless they be assured about transparent, secure, a system where with high predictability, where you couldn't be surprised with decision coming. So it's a long-term predictable system. So this is very much important. Also regarding Lebanon specifically, you remember maybe the public protest back in 2019 in Lebanon, and one of the key words the government announced at that time that they are planning to establish an energy regulator in Lebanon, because they believe that without an energy regulator, they couldn't overcome the energy crisis in Lebanon, which was a key part of the reasons for the demonstration, public demonstration in the country. Yes, maybe there was delayed due to the other events, the explosion happened or whatever, but for sure, the government or administration in Lebanon is quite very well aware about how role of regulator could play in resolving the problem. Moving to our third presentation, which is very much really linked to what we are talking, because regulator and transmitters are, or system operators are twins. Basically, you couldn't establish a market unless you have an interconnection. You couldn't establish a market unless you have a right regulation in place. Exactly like flow of goods. You need roads and ports to transfer goods, but if you don't have the proper tax laws, the proper custom regulations, proper specs in place, there might be roads available, but you couldn't exchange a proper pricing system. You might able to exchange, but you might not be able to exchange goods. But on the other side, if you have the proper regulation, but you don't have interconnection, you haven't did anything. So this is move us to our third presentation, which will be presented by Angelo Ferranti, Secretary General of MED-TSO, which is a sister association to MEDREG. He will talk to us about TSO enabling the energy transition in the Mediterranean, MED-TSO, and master plan for 2020. But at the beginning, let me introduce Mr. Angelo Ferranti. Mr. Angelo Ferranti is the Secretary General of MED-TSO, the Association of Mediterranean Transmission System Operator for Electricity, and Head of European Affairs in Terna. Terna is the Italian TSO, the Italian Transmission System Operator for Electricity. Mr. Ferranti is an electrical engineer with more than 30 years professional experience in power sector, with a special focus on international cooperation, project financing, regulations, and relations with international organizations. He is a career, in his career, Mr. Ferranti has been also deeply involved in research and development and technical assistance projects in many parts of the world. Mr. Ferranti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor El Salmawi. I hope you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Yes, we hear you very well and see your screen.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and the possibility to present the activities carried out by MED-TSO. Just a few words about the association for those of you who were not aware. As it was said, the MED-TSO is the association of the transmission system operators for electricity in the Mediterranean. We count now 21 members from 19 countries. The companies dispatch more than 1,600 terawatt hours of electricity that's produced by more than 500,000 megawatts of installed capacity all around the Mediterranean countries, and transferring through more than 400,000 kilometers of transmission lines electricity to about 550 million people all around the region. As you can see, our members include many European countries and all the North Africa countries. The only exception in Middle East are Lebanon, but we are in talks with EDL for having them on board in the association, and Syria. So our idea is to establish a platform. We were set up in 2012 to establish a platform for multilateral cooperation in the Mediterranean and building a bridge between Europe and the MENA region, trying to create a favorable climate for the development of North-South and South-South interconnections. In this perspective, we aim at launching some pilot projects to strengthen the integration of the Middle East and Northern Africa power system. And in this activity, we are supported by the European Commission that has already funded 2 projects since 2015, and is now funding a 3rd one that's ongoing and that will finish at the end of 2022. Our main characteristics, I may say, is that we follow a full bottom-up approach. That means that all the technical activities are carried out by the members of the companies who have joined MED-TSO. We are structured in technical committees dealing with the different tasks, the different streams of activity of our association. What is the context in which we operate? Let's say that one main characteristic of the Mediterranean countries is that all of them are involved in the energy transition. All of them have signed the Paris Agreement. The energy transition is characterized, that has been said by the previous speakers, also in a very steep increase of demand and the following need of huge investments in gas and renewables. But these investments are often limited by market fragmentation and the heavy asymmetries in legislation and regulation, especially for what concerns renewables. So the transmission system operators are called to adapt to this new context because the operation of the system is more complex due to the massive presence of renewables, and the system in general needs more flexibility. So integration, we believe, is a key driver for achieving the energy transition, taking also profit of the complementarities that exist between the Mediterranean countries, both seasonal between north and south, and hardly between east and west. Let's not forget that there are almost 4 hours, it depends on the part of the year, but there might be 4-hour difference between the eastern and the western countries in the Mediterranean, but also of structural differences in the generation mix. There are additional challenges, the very limited interconnections among many countries, especially the South Shore, and or the non-efficient use of interconnections when they exist. And above all, an unstable environment for investors because of the already mentioned market fragmentation, and also because of the lack of long-term price signals for investors. All these things to say that integration is no longer an option in the Mediterranean, that the limited, inadequate interconnection level is a barrier for achieving the energy transition, and in that perspective, that reinforced cooperation is essential. This map that has been already shown by Hassan, according to me, says more than many words about the need of developing interconnection, because if we believe the electricity is one of the drivers of energy transition, and also one of the drivers of economic development, and having in mind the figures that were shown by Lisa on the enormous development of GDP, the perspective of increased gross domestic production, population, especially in the southern and eastern shores of the Mediterranean, you compare the development of the grids in the northern part with the very limited, the graphical, very limited interconnections existing in the south region, and you understand that developing interconnection is one of the priority actions that have to be taken in the Mediterranean. Our activity is structured basically around 3 main themes that derive from what I've said so far. So one main activity that we perform is the development of coordinating planning procedures. It is something that's very well known in the European countries, that was not considered in non-EU countries, where usually each development plan, national development plan, is considered without taking into account the bordering countries. So in this perspective, we have developed a shared methodology for developing the high voltage grid, and one of our main deliverables is the Mediterranean Master Plan. I will talk about in the next of my presentation. But as Hassan said, we do not need only hardware, that's the grid, we need also software, that's the rules, because without common rules, you cannot achieve power system interoperability. That's why one stream of our activities deal with the definition of a so-called Mediterranean grid code, at least a set of harmonized technical rules for favoring power system interoperability and promoting integration of power systems. The other stream of activity, very important, the other pillar of our activities is capacity building, because we believe that integration means also a common background for all the companies. In this perspective, we are organizing training course and we are promoting a knowledge sharing program, also in cooperation with our stakeholders. These activities that were carried out have been already carried out in the first two Mediterranean projects, completed, the first completed in 2018 and the second completed in 2020, will be performed also in the new project TCMed that has been launched at the end of last year and will last until December 2022. In addition, in this project, we would like to launch the concept of creating interconnected electricity exchange zones, this in cooperation with MEDREG, because we need the support of regulators. These pilot projects should be launched for accelerating the process of integration, not at global regional level, but in some parts of the Mediterranean basin where the conditions are better. And we would start in assessing coordinating adequacy plans and trying to be effective in enhancing coordination in the operations of the already interconnected power grids. About the master plan, I will spend some words about the master plan. The last edition of the master plan was edited at the end of 2020, last year. It consists of 15 projects for about 5,800 kilometers of additional lines, a significant part in HVDC, high voltage direct current, because we are talking about undersea interconnections, in many cases, more than 4,000 kilometers of HVDC cables, for more than 18 gigawatt of new interconnection capacity that has been assessed, and for a total investments estimated around 12 billion euros. These 15 projects have been clustered in different groups. We have assessed projects in the West Mediterranean corridor. Another cluster is the Central Mediterranean corridor and North Africa backbone. Then there is an Eastern Balkan corridor, a Mediterranean Middle East reinforcement, and the Southeast Mediterranean hub. Taking profit, if I may say, but I mean more seriously, due to the pandemic and the difficulty to organize technical meetings in presence, we have worked hard in using the digital means that all of us have learned to use in this period. But the consequence was also that we have developed also digital versions of our deliverables, much more detailed than we used to do in the past. An example is the possibility to access to all the information on the projects assessed in the master plan through the internet at this address, masterplan.mettso.com, where out of the report on paper that's of course available on our website, you can enter into the details of all the projects that have been studied. Another interesting thing I would like to mention is the power statistics website. I think for the first time, all the Mediterranean countries have collected in one place basic statistical information on generation, consumption, exchange of electricity, etc. It is a process that will be continuously updated, and all the information can be found at data.mettso.com. The development of the master plan is an integrated process that starts from the definition of scenarios for the region, defining the list, allowing so to define the list of future interconnection projects, set up of reference models of power system at regional level to perform market studies and check the commercial viability of new interconnections among the countries, analyze the network, the behavior of the network, basically through load flow calculations to see if there are constraints or limitations due to the security of the system. And at the end of the process, there is a cost-benefit analysis that's carried out for new proposed investments. This cost-benefit analysis is based on a methodology that's shared among all the members that resemble what has been assessed by ACER at the European level, with some changes related to the peculiarities of the Mediterranean context. But also in this case, this activity is carried out with the full agreement of all the members. As far as scenarios are concerned, we have had you know that the reason of developing scenarios is to explore possible future situation of load and generation, assessing the possibility of developing new interconnections in our perspective, of course. So the objective of our scenarios, development is to define contrasted conditions in order not to have a forecast of what's going to happen in the future, but to define the boundaries of a possible situation, assuming that the reality will fall between the boundaries that we have set up with these contrasted scenarios. To do this, we hypothesize, we consider the trends, the evolution trend of many variables, going from macroeconomic factors to policies, to the expected technological developments, and so on. In our studies for the Master Plan 2020, we used a time horizon 2030 for assessing, for developing these scenarios. In particular, we have developed 3 scenarios with different, let's say, we could say the one deal is a kind of business as usual. The second giving particular emphasis to the development of renewables. And the third one with the strong, expected strong development of renewables and also strong development of the integration level. There were some, based on these 3 scenarios, we've carried out market studies to assess the commercial viability of potential new interconnection. Based on our analysis, we see that in all the scenarios, as an average, electricity consumption is expected to increase by 25 to 33% by 2030. There is a consolidated trend towards increased renewables, decreased fossils, and uncertainty on nuclear. We have considered also wind offshore, although for the time being, despite the announcement, there were not many initiatives yet in the Mediterranean Sea, but the evolution as far as wind offshore is concerned is evolving very fast. In Italy, for instance, there are an enormous number of requests of connections for potential new offshore wind offshore parks, and we will see for the future plan how to take into account this fact. Other aspects that have been considered, the marginal price differentials in the different countries based on the generation mix that each country has, and the expected CO2 reduction determined by the change in the generation patterns according to the different scenarios. Based on this, as I said, we have proceeded with a power systems modeling phase and cost-benefit analysis. As far as modeling is concerned, we have modeled all the thermal units, the seasonal hydro reservoirs, storage systems, and intermittent generation. And on these models, we have developed a Monte Carlo approach, considering different possible early time series of electrical demand, intermittent wind and solar generation, and hydraulic inflows, and the availability of thermal units. As far as CBA methodology is concerned, this has been carried out by assessing the costs of the projects and evaluating their benefits according to a number of indicators, some of them quantitative, with a clear reflection in euros or dollars, whatever, per year gained by the proposed interconnection projects, and other indicators that are not quantified. This is in line with the methodology carried out by, developed by ACER. You see probably the most important indicator is the SU, the socioeconomic welfare, but also losses and security of supply have been taken into account, as well as other indicators. Network studies, as I said, to assess the technical feasibility of the proposed interconnections, with the identification of point in time, a number of point in times that are, let's say, snapshots of the different load and generation patterns. These studies have been carried out by a full representation, a full model of all the Mediterranean countries with bordering conditions for the countries not belonging to the perimeter of MET-TSO, but with whom MET-TSO countries have an exchange of electricity. All these projects have been classified according to the merits, to where they impact more on different aspects of the power system. If they are useful for market aspects by reducing the price differential between countries, if they are useful in terms of dispatching adequacy and security of supply, if they are useful in terms of operation. As far as Egypt is concerned, we have 3 projects in the Master Plan 2020 dealing with this country. One is how can I say, explorative study for a new interconnection with Turkey, about 800 kilometers of submarine cable for a capacity of 3,000 megawatts. We didn't develop choices about technologies, HVDC technologies, if LCC or VSC. Anyhow, it was estimated an overall investment cost of about almost 3 billion euros, of which a very limited percentage, about 1% of internal reinforcement in the Turkish grid. I have to say that when the Mediterranean Project 2 in 2018 started, and so also the definition of projects was made, we were not able to take profit of the Egyptian data. Let's say currently ETC, the Egyptian Transmission System Operator, is a very committed and very active member of MET-TSO. In the past, when these projects were studied, it was not, the situation was a bit more complicated, so not being available data to modelize the Egyptian power system, Egypt was represented as an external busbar. Anyhow, with this limited approach, the project yields a positive impact in the values of all the cost-benefit analysis indicators in all the three simulated scenarios, especially because of a significant increase of the social economic welfare. Another interconnection project that has been assessed is the doubling of the already existing interconnection with Jordan. It is a rather short undersea cable through the Gulf of Aqaba to double the interconnection capacity between the two countries. So 13 kilometers AC cable in alternating current at a depth of about, maximum depth of about 850 meters from Taba to Aqaba. Let's say also in this case, the promoter was NEPCO, because of the difficulty of having Egyptian data for assessing the study. Let's say the issue, the characteristic of this project is that it requires most of the estimated cost, 150 million euros, relates to internal developments of the Jordan grid. Anyhow, the global cost-benefit analysis show a positive impact of this project. Although, for instance, the CO2 emission reduction variation is not very, it's rather small in at least two of the three scenarios. The third project is a Cyprus-Egypt interconnection that could be seen as a kind of integration of the other interconnection project between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. So it could be a kind of derivation, a kind of yes, as I said, the integration of the Euro-Asia project. We have studied the possibility to develop an HVDC undersea cable between Cyprus and Egypt for an interconnection capacity of about 1,000 megawatts. And an estimated cost of 890 million euros. Also, in this case, also for Israel, we had the same problem that we had for Egypt. So data for modeling the grids were not available, and therefore the systems were represented in these two countries were represented by an external bus. Let's say the evolution of this project, of course, is ongoing. You know that the project has also another interconnection that's between the Isle of Crete and the continental Greece. There's under construction, but that's complementary to this Israel or Egypt, Cyprus, Isle of Crete project. And now, to complete, just a few words about TCMed. TCMed is the new project that's ongoing. While it has some novelties compared to the previous studies carried out by MED. So the first, dealing with scenarios. For the first time, we are trying to define long-term planning and decarbonization strategy, having a time horizon of 2050. This to be a bit in line with the ambitions of the European Commission and all the initiatives and the policies that tend to a global decarbonization, at least in Europe, by 2050. And the other also to take into account new coupling perspectives with gas, the development of hydrogen, green hydrogen. So in this phase for developing this planning activity, we very much count on stakeholders like OME or IEA that are very much experienced in this activity. Also in terms of rules, the new project has the ambition to complete the preparation of the Mediterranean Greek Code by developing further chapters of this document, especially for what concerns operation that for the time being was not developed too much, and market, because with the idea of launching pilot projects, we need to develop rules, shared rules for aspects like the allocation of the interconnection capacity, the congestion management, electricity balancing, and all these aspects that for the time being had not been dealt with. The pilot projects I mentioned, we have in the pipeline two initiatives, one dealing with the Maghreb countries and the other with the Mashrek countries. We are starting with the Maghreb because the existence of interconnection, although not very efficiently managed, makes the process in principle a bit faster. And we know that this is quite ambitious, but we are confident that with the cooperation of all the stakeholders and the institutions in the region, we are able to put in place, facilitate these pilot projects. Last point, we are developing also coordinated adequacy assessment. Is an exercise that has not very much that was not many countries did not use to carry out so far. This is an interesting challenge for the association. Again, another table of cooperation among all the members. Knowledge sharing, yes, we count on the support of the European Commission, Union for the Mediterranean, MEDREG and OME are our institutional partners, if I may say. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm available for any questions you might have. Hafez, you are mute.
Yes. So we are back now. Thank you very much, Angelo, for your very interesting presentation. Actually, it raised a lot of questions. Basically, a question about are we still need for mid-TSO gas and kind of integration or sometimes competition between electricity transmission and gas transmission. Specifically, if we talk about something like hydrogen, is it economical to generate hydrogen in a country and transmit it in a pipeline, or have renewable in a country and transmit renewable energy and generate hydrogen at the demand point? So I think this is very much important. Also, there was usually question about Mediterranean, because Mediterranean is a very deep sea, has a very deep seabed. So usually maybe 10 years or more a little bit ago was saying that above 2 kilometer water deep, it's very hard to have an interconnection or cables go across. So I believe it looks that this challenge has been already relieved, and many projects now are maybe extended over this very deep water. Also, you raised a point which I believe is very much important, because when we talk about Egypt-Jordan interconnection, from a Mediterranean perspective, we talk about 1,100 megawatt interconnection. But currently, they talk about interconnecting Egypt with Iraq through Jordan. So they talk about 2,000 megawatt. So the question is basically, could we deal with Mediterranean as a separate system, or it's very highly affected by neighboring system like European system, like Gulf and Iraq in the east, like African system in the south. So I think this poses more challenges regarding modeling activities. Also, I think which is an area where very much important to be considered, because as Lisa showed, that primarily the electricity system will much rely on renewable. So when we talk about exchanging electricity, it will be primarily renewable with a minor quantities of non-renewable. So guarantee of origin certificates and certification system across the Mediterranean, to be sure that, I think this is a regulatory issue, to be sure that what's being exchanged, is that renewable, is that conventional, is that whatever. So this is a trading issue. I really was very much interested about what MID-TSO did regarding network study, like coordinating adequacy assessment. Actually, this is a very important area to be considered, and I believe it's a very high value added. TSO could also contribute not just interconnection, but also to other countries. I may took a long comments. I think we need to move quickly to the Q&A session. Unfortunately, we already exceeded our time, but I believe we have already 2 questions. I may have one question more, but I would like we received question from Marie Van Stel. Actually, it's forward to Mr. Oskok. She for sure thank him for very excellent presentation, and she asked, could you please explain more specifically how cross subsidizations impact the competition at the regional level? Also, what are the possible action of MEDREG on this issue, given that it's highly entrenched in states' relations to their own societies?
First of all, I thank you very much for these very interesting and very important questions, because while you are really planning to liberalize the energy market, first and foremost, you have to prohibit the cross subsidization among the different activities. This is a key measure that we have taken into account. Otherwise, how could regulators can clearly identify the cost-based tariff, which is the most important, crucial, let's say, the part of the regulation. That's why in the law and the related regulation, cross-subsidization should be prohibited. And this is one of the key elements in opening the markets to competition. However, there are, of course, the influence of the policy makers on this cross-subsidization. But we believe that in order to create a fully transparent regulation and in order to identify transparently and impartially the tariffs, the cross-subsidization should be prohibited among different activities. For example, from transmission to distribution, from distribution to supply, and the other parts of the system. So this is a key element. So the regulators and the government should ensure this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, we have two questions from Abdul Muttalib. Yes, please go on.
The additional questions, whether MEDREC can do something for this. Of course,
Yes,
we are a voluntary-based association. We cannot really impose any kind of, let's say, the rules and regulations. We only ensure the exchange of information, the best practices, the experiences of our members with each other. We can only this one, and we can show clear, let's say, the experiences on this cross-subsidization. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we have a question to Mr. Ferranti. Basically, it's go in line with what I mentioned about Jordan. Actually, we have a first question from Abdul Muttalib, as well as go on the same line from Yusra Askar. Actually, both are asking about Egypt-Jordan interconnection, which could extend to Iraq, and Egypt-Saudi Gulf interconnection or integration, which it goes beyond. So the question is basically, when we do a planning or a master plan for the Mediterranean, is that taken into consideration other extension to beyond Mediterranean countries for this interconnection, specifically when we do cost-benefit analysis for this interconnection?
Yes, what I can say is that METSO in any case doesn't want to replace investors. This means that nor the, let's say, the national institutions that are in charge for developing the national plans. The objective of METSO was to define shared methodologies, a common approach that's capable to assess projects not at the national level, but at the regional level, by agreeing on the criteria that have to be taken into account. As far as our studies are concerned, of course, you cannot, how can I say, fence the power sector and modelize only inside the fences, because of course electricity doesn't work in this way. So for instance, now in the new project we are considering the interconnection, the expected interconnection of Egypt with Saudi Arabia. We know also of the already existing interconnection with Sudan. We know Turkey has interconnections with Iraq, etc. But when you have to modelize grid on which you want to carry out your studies, you have to, at a certain point, you have to stop and limit and model what is outside the grid of your more specific interest according to models or bordering conditions. So this is what we do in our studies. But I agree with you, you cannot consider the development of interconnections in a specific region without taking into account the other projects that exist between the region, the countries of the region, and other surrounding areas. That's the case of Iraq, of Saudi Arabia, Gulf countries. We are trying to take all of them on board in our studies, but again, we do not replace investors. So when a national, when a country has to develop its national development plan, we hope it can take profit of the shared methodology developed at METSO level for considering the regional impact of these projects, but of course the responsibility of developing projects is in its hands.
Thank you very much. I have a question to Lisa, basically, which she presented to us perspectives up to 2050. Maybe it's a challenge that many of the countries don't really have a strategy or perspective up to 2050. They might have, like Egypt 2035, so are working to develop it to 2040. Other countries may have up to 2030. So there might be not on the national level a clear vision about what could be beyond the existing setting. But OME come up with a kind of perspective up to 2050. So does this mean that OME put some assumptions or an extrapolation to some of what could be done? And the question, does OME provide back or provide a feedback what they considered regarding to the national level, what they considered in their model, so it could be helped for strategy developers in this country in order to make like an conversions to what could be, or it could like a solved example to them for how things could be developed in the coming future. So what's your opinion, Lisa, about this?
Yeah, that was the tricky aspect of this modeling exercise, going to 2050. I think the idea, and I think that's what's behind the new Green Deal, is if you want to reach the target, is what do you do to get there? And the problem is that if you don't look at 2050, you might be doing 2030 wrong, you know? So yes, there's a lot of facts to 2030 because we have the plans, we have the targets, depending on country, 2030, 2035, sometimes 2040. Of course, the Green Deal goes to 2050 now, but even for European countries, it is challenging. And when we started this, only 4 countries, even up to now, I think there's 5 countries of the Mediterranean that have come up with actual plans, detailed plans to 2050. And I think the message here is that it has to start now, and that everything you can do has to be done, basically. Of course, it has to be, and I think that was one of the things that was quite obvious, even when you look at France versus Italy versus Spain versus Portugal plan to 2050, they are very different because they are based on each country's specificity. So that's what we try to take into account. Now, of course, this is just projections and they can be changed. But I think the important message is that based on what is available and the technologies that are available, this is what is the most likely, considering where the countries are going towards in 2030. But more needs to be done than what has been announced. This is basically it. And I think when we talk about energy efficiency as being crucial, I think this is where we really need to understand that things have to change. And even if you think France or Portugal plans, this is rebuilding, I mean, rethinking cities, rethinking how you go to and from somewhere. And it's not just changing vehicles to electricity or to hydrogen. It's changing the way you transport yourself. More electric, it's not just electric vehicles, it's electric bikes, it's public transport. This is things that need to be set in place now, because especially in developing worlds where, you know, you're adding new demand, you have more population, you're building new cities, it is the time now to make them efficient. Once they're built, it's too late. And I think in Egypt, this is also the case. They're building buildings every day, hundreds, thousands of new dwellings, and it's now that it has to be done properly, because we know, and we've got the experience in the north, if you have to refurbish or reorganize, it's much more costly and less efficient. So yes, we took into account after 2030, 2040, depending on countries, we have to make assumptions. There are some that are detailed in our map. And of course, you know, this can be discussed, but the main message is everything needs to be developed to full. And this is maximum renewables, offshore wind, new technologies, this is hydrogen, biomethane, everything has to be pushed to the maximum, but it has to start now, or it will be unfeasible.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Actually, this was one of the main reasons for this webinar, is basically we say that we know about us up to 2035, and you know that because this is the reason documents available and share information. But you have a much futuristic vision. So please feed us with what you take into consideration about us, so it could help us in building our vision, so we could converge what we are thinking about in developing Egypt energy future with what you are considered. Because when you talk about Mediterranean, you talk about area, it's not just one country, so we need to converge all this together. So I think this kind of mutual interaction is very much important, and this futuristic visions very much be fed back to each country included, so they could help them in developing themselves so we could converge things and make what we expect reality by 2050 and hopefully to be the net zero program. I think we already exceed our time by 30%. I couldn't thank more our presenter for their wealth information. Sure, Lisa, Hassan, Angelo, actually your contribution is very highly valuable and you add much to our information, and really the excellent presentation you provided is very much helpful. And actually we received one of the questions asking about are we going to share this presentation? We will try to do so. We will get the permission from the presenter, and as we will share this presentation to our attendees. Also, I would like by the end thank Marion Kozman for her effort. Actually, she practically is the steam behind developing these things. Her effort, although she got vaccinated soon and she suffered some challenges, but she kept working under this hard condition, trying to bring this webinar up to its best, as I hope we already has achieved. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you back again to our presenters, and looking forward to see you in our next webinar, which will be on COP26. Actually, perspectives for COP26 will be take place in November. Actually, our webinar will take first week of September, which will talk about generally what perspective of COP26, specifically as United States is rejoining back, as well as what Egypt communicated to COP26 and what we expect out of it. Thank you very much. Looking forward to have you with us, and thank you and bye-bye. Looking forward. Thank you all.
Marion.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.